I've just put some random things in the background so it didn't look too plain, but enjoy, and hopefully the start of a brand new segment here on the channel will be interesting, even if the background is not, because today I'm going to be talking about Percy Jackson versus Jason Grace. Let's get into it. Now, like I said, this is going to be a brand new segment here on the channel, and it is inspired by Antoine Bandelet, a friend of mine, and his channel, where he's been doing these versus series. They can be things like, in his case, Avatar, Star Wars, and just putting these characters up against each other and breaking it down into categories to then decide who will win in the end. And because this is a predominantly Roundverse channel, it will be all Roundverse characters. And Percy Jackson and Jason Grace fight? Well, that's the one that everyone is always debating about as to who would come out on top. So, before I get into it, these are the three main categories. So we have training, powers, personality, and then when we combine those together, we have the fight outcome. Things will be kind of done slightly in rounds, like what Antoine Bandelet does, but it's more going to be just me kind of breaking it down a little bit. So let's get into how would a battle between Percy Jackson and Jason Grace go. Let's start first with training. Now, Jason Grace kind of takes, the lead for training, because in comparison to Percy, who only really trains whenever he's at Camp Half-Blood, Jason Grace has been with New Rome and the Romans since he was very, very young, and has, from the looks of it, been training for many, many years. So training in general, Jason is going to come out on top because he has, had military training. He has been around and, connected to the Roman military from a young age. Whereas Percy, he's kind of like a summer camp training sort of person. I'm kind of that person. I used to play piano, but I only played piano when I knew I was having a lesson coming up. So my piano lessons and piano skills were kind of subpar because I didn't train all the time. And then when I didn't have lessons anymore, I kind of lost that ability. And we see that a lot with Percy. Percy only trains whenever he's at camp or, meeting people from camp. And he mentions many times that he is quite rusty. And of course, that would be the case because he has not been training consistently. Jason Grace, however, trains consistently. That's basically the entire thing of being part of the army of New Rome. And we know he's been part of the army of New Rome consistently for, I think it's 5 years. We see 5 stripes on his arms. So we know he's been training for a very long time. Whereas if you add up all the times that Percy has been training whilst at camp, which is maybe a couple of months out of the year, he's probably in total had fighting training for 1.5 years out of 5-6 years of being a demigod. So it you kind of get the idea a little bit. Jason takes the cake when it comes to training skill, giving him a slight advantage. But going into number 2, powers. Now, this will be of no surprise to anyone. Percy is going to come out on top with powers because the boy is so overpowered. He has basically everything. Jason has what? Lightning, flight, and, a magic sword. Percy has control over water, can breathe underwater, has a magic sword, can create tornadoes if he needs to, and can basically bloodbend. Anything that's a liquid, he can control. Jason's screwed, but this does also kind of depend on where they are fighting. So yeah, there's not really any point for further discussion on powers because there was no chance Jason was going to win based on powers because he has very limited powers in comparison to Percy. So Percy takes this win for powers, now putting him and Jason on an even playing field, which is when we lead into personality. Oh, you wouldn't think that personality would be important for fighting, but it would definitely influence the way in which someone would, actually fight a situation. In the case of Percy, Percy's fighting abilities are almost always nearly tied to his emotions. He can go but what's the word that I want to use here? He can go mad with his powers, in the sense of like, just think of the scene when admittedly, I know it's because he's got the Achilles touch at that point in time, but I think even if he didn't, it would have been a very similar situation. When Annabeth gets hurt and he decimates the entire enemy forces just because Annabeth got hurt. Same with so many people that he cares about. When they've gotten hurt, he's gone ham on the people who caused them harm. If something is leading to, say there's a reason for why they are fighting, Percy is going to take it personally. And it's based on his personal connection to a fight that leads to whether or not he is going to be an impressive fighter. If it is just a casual sparring, he'll be good and he'll probably get competitive because Percy's seemingly kind of a competitive person, especially considering, you know, the bit of the pissing match that him and Jason had in the books. But he wouldn't take it as seriously as if it was a real battle situation. So for all intents and purposes, we're going to say that the fight between Jason and Percy is a proper fight. Something has led to both of them needing to fight each other of their own free mind, not like what Gaia did in the books. Whereas with Jason is the sort of person that he doesn't always need a reason to fight. He needs to know that they're doing it for the right reasons, but he is the sort of person as he will fight because he knows he needs to. He doesn't always need the motivation behind it. He just needs to do it. If there's a reason, he's going to be fighting. And he puts a lot of effort and energy into what he does. We see even in the first book, even though he has no idea who Piper and Leo are, he fights to protect them. He fights to protect the classmates, the people he knows nothing about these people. And yet he goes above and beyond to fight for them. And yes, you know, he struggles here and there, but he continues to keep pushing through, which shows a level of determination behind him of just like, no matter who you are, no matter where we are, no matter what's happened, if you need help, I will fight for you. If you need protecting, I will fight for you. So him and Percy are somewhat similar in that, though in the case of Percy, it's almost always someone who is connected to him or someone he can empathize with. We don't often see him fight for people he doesn't know. There's always a connection to someone to a degree. In the case of like Nico and Bianca, they were there for a reason, so that's why he was fighting for them. I think he would still help out people even if he didn't know them, but we haven't seen that as much, which obviously, you know, he does have a caring side. I'm not saying Percy doesn't have a caring side, but most of the reason why he goes into intense battles and becomes intense is due to the fact that there is an emotional connection there. Whereas Jason, when he goes into intense battles and becomes an intense fighter, sometimes, yeah, it's because there's a personal connection, but there doesn't always have to be for him. So in terms of a reason for fighting and kind of like the motivation behind fighting, I want to say that they'd be quite equal, but with the differences in their fighting ability based on their personalities, Percy does somewhat come out on top, because if something is incredibly personal to him, he will go all or nothing, and in a very terrifying way. Whereas Jason, it's not that he holds back, but it's that he's not gone full terror mode, whereas Percy definitely has. So in terms of personality based on fighting reasons, Percy also takes it as giving him an advantage of 2-1. But for the actual fight itself, I think this could go either way. So let's give it a even playing field. They're in a field. There's no trees, there's no water nearby, they're just in a field. They have their swords, that is the only thing that they can call. They cannot bring in their horses or anything like that. They have their weapons, they have their powers, they have an even playing field. How is this going to go? Now for me, I feel like Percy would be the person to make the first move, just because he just wants to kind of get into this. Whereas Jason will be calculating everything that is going on, as well as the fact that he's a Roman. You know, there's a lot of strategy-based things that goes there, whereas Percy doesn't really have strategies unless Annabeth's involved. So Percy is making the first move, Jason is calculating what to do from there. They're going to combat with their weapons and it's all looking pretty even until Jason uses his powers for the first time. He starts using his flight, he starts moving around, he is evading, he is using more defensive tactics than offensive tactics because a lot of Jason's stuff is defensive instead of offensive, unless he really needs to attack the person. Whereas Percy is going more on the offensive. And then Percy uses his water abilities, pulling moisture from the air and knocking Jason out of the sky. And things are just kind of going chaos from here. Neither of them are kind of getting the upper hand. They're all kind of like, one of them does and then the other does. It's a lot of back and forth consistently. But as the battle continues on, Jason is starting to come out a little bit more on top because Percy's abilities, while they may not drain him as much, his lack of fighting skill is catching up to him, his lack of training. Whereas Jason's training is helping him stay less exhausted for an extended period of time. He's able to keep going, draining Percy's energy because Percy's been more on the offensive than the defensive, which means he has been attacking more. So Jason is keeping the energy, Percy is losing his. And then Percy continues to use his water abilities and even helps get himself into the air by bringing about the mini tornado, which unfortunately does drain him quite a lot. So they're back on a somewhat even playing field, but Percy is more tired than he was before. Jason is getting a little bit more tired now because Percy has really been giving it to him. But because he's still being consistent with the defensive tactics, when he moves into the offensive, Percy is drained and, not always expecting it because, it's a completely different move to what Jason was doing before. So Jason gets the upper hand using the fact that he's had training much longer than what he had than Percy. And yes, he may not have the same level of powers as Percy, but Percy's been using his a lot more than Jason has. So Percy is being overwhelmed a little bit. And because of that, he's getting angrier and getting more frustrated, which leads to an explosion of further powers, sending Jason flying back and disarming him. Because when Percy is put into a corner, that's when he becomes his most dangerous. He may be exhausted, but he's able to use the last little bit of his energy to slam Jason back, putting Percy just on top in the last moment. So Percy wins this battle, but if they carried on again and did another, Jason would surely win. For every 3 battles, for example, Percy would win 1, Jason would win the other 2, because Percy relies a lot on his abilities, and his sword work is not as good as Jason's. If he uses his abilities too much, it kind of has nothing left to give. So yes, he may win the first battle, but Jason will win the other 2. So in Percy versus Jason, Jason Grace will be coming out on top and everyone's gonna hate me. So what do you think of this Percy versus Jason round? Do you think this is how it would have gone, or do you think I'm a complete moron, which is probably going to be what a lot of people think? So let me know in the comment section down below who you think would actually win in a Percy versus Jason fight. Do you think I'm accurate? Do you think I'm stupid? Whatever the case, let me know in the comment section down below, as well as who you would like me to do a versus battle of next. Yeah, thank you all so much for tuning into this video. I appreciate it very much. Check out all the links to my Patreon, my books, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, again, thank you so much, and I'll see you all next time.